The portrait of a happy family. Nestled in a peaceful suburb at the edge of a bustling Texas city, stands a two-story house. Its white picket fence and manicured lawn almost straight out of a magazine. It's the kind of neighborhood where neighbors wave from behind rose bushes, children pedal bikes across cul-de-sacs, and family barbecues dot the weekends. To outsiders, the home of Amelia and Daniel Preston is an embodiment of the American dream. Amelia, a woman in her late 30s, greets each day with the gentle hum of the coffee maker and the golden Texas sunrise pooling through the kitchen window. She once had a promising career in architecture, but the arrival of her son, Lucas, shifted her priorities. Without hesitation, she left behind blueprints, design meetings, and accolades to devote herself entirely to building a different foundation, her family. Her days flow in a comforting rhythm, packing school lunches, tending to the garden, managing every detail of their home with almost invisible efficiency. Daniel, her husband, is the picture of suburban success. Charismatic, well-dressed, and always ready with a warm smile. As a partner at a growing real estate firm, he is a familiar figure at community events, known for his generosity and good humor. To the neighborhood, Daniel is the ideal family man, devoted to his wife and child, the kind of husband any woman would envy. Their son, Lucas, is a lively 8-year-old with curious eyes and a stubborn streak. He adores his mother and looks up to his father, idolizing Daniel's charm and confidence. In the evenings, the family gathers for home-cooked meals, tossing stories back and forth around the dining table, laughter echoing against the soft clink of cutlery. Photo frames line the hallway, cataloging milestones, birthdays, first steps, school plays, vacations on the Gulf Coast. All frozen moments hinting at unbreakable unity. Amelia's identity revolves around creating an oasis of calm. She is diligent, attentive to small details, a perfectly ironed shirt for Daniel, a fresh batch of cookies for Lucas's classmates, a spotless home filled with the scent of lavender. Her sacrifices, her career, her ambitions, are privately acknowledged and accepted with a quiet pride. She sees herself as the invisible current beneath her family's surface, steady and unseen. Daniel, meanwhile, often boasts to friends and colleagues about how lucky he is to have Amelia, praising her devotion and insisting she is the linchpin of their home. To their social circle, the Prestons are a shining example, invited everywhere and trusted with every secret. Their life, on the surface, is enviable and, to most, utterly flawless. Yet beneath all this tranquility, there are fleeting hints, so subtle they're easy to dismiss, of something deeper. Occasionally, Amelia's eyes linger on her wedding photo, searching for assurances in Daniel's broad smile. There are moments late at night when the world is silent, where Amelia questions her own happiness, wondering if her sacrifices are as invisible to Daniel as they are to the rest of the world. She quickly buries these thoughts, believing them the natural doubts that come with any long marriage. In the eyes of friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, the Preston family shines like a perfectly polished pearl, unblemished, harmonious, the envy of all. For now, at least, the portrait they present is one of uninterrupted joy. Laughter on the front lawn, warmth within, and not a single storm cloud on their horizon. Subtle signs. The early summer air in Texas had always carried a sense of predictability for Amelia. Each morning, as she listened to the rhythmic chirping of birds and the distant hum of lawnmowers, routine guided her steps. Yet, as June bled into July, she began to register faint disturbances in the familiar patterns of her life, so slight, so easy to overlook, that she questioned whether she'd noticed them at all. It started innocently enough. Daniel's work schedule, once regular as clockwork, gradually grew erratic. There were now unexpected calls that beckoned him out at odd hours, explanations that grew vaguer. A last-minute dinner with clients, an urgent meeting on the other side of town, a business trip that, curiously, hadn't been mentioned until the very morning he packed his overnight bag. At first, Amelia dismissed these changes as evidence of her husband's rising success. After all, Daniel's ambition was bound to keep him busy. But Daniel's absences were more than just physical. He seemed mentally distant, too. Distracted during dinner, slow to laugh, his mind always half occupied. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly between them now hung awkward in the air. Sometimes he stared into his phone during family movie night, or, when Amelia entered a room, quickly slid his device into his jacket pocket as if expecting a message meant for his eyes alone. Little things began to pile up. The scent of a different perfume lingering on Daniel's collar. A crisp floral note, so distinct from Amelia's subtle lavender. Receipts from upscale restaurants he had never mentioned. Crumbs of expensive pastries tucked away in his car. Amelia's once clear calendar now had to accommodate his sudden meetings and spontaneous late nights, whittling down time once reserved for their family. Lucas, perceptive in his own childish way, wondered aloud why his dad missed bedtime stories more often. "Daddy's just really busy," Amelia reassured him, pushing away the ache in her chest. Curiosity battled with denial. Amelia began to notice how Daniel grew oddly protective of his phone, setting a passcode for the first time in their marriage. He laughed less at home, growing impatient when reminded of forgotten errands or missed school events. He complimented her less, and though he tried to mask his distraction with grand gestures, a bouquet of flowers, surprise dinner, Amelia felt an unfamiliar coolness settle between them. Yet through it all, Amelia told herself not to jump to conclusions. With steadfast calm, she observed, catalogued, and buried her unease behind a gentle smile. She held on to routine, steeled by a kind of quiet dignity that refused to let suspicion rule her heart. In quieter moments, when the house lay still and the moonlight streaked through gauzy curtains, Amelia found herself replaying conversations, picking apart the details. Was Daniel's lateness really just work? Did he always smile so absently when she asked about his day? There was no confrontation, no accusation. Instead, Amelia's gaze turned inward, determined to watch, wait, and gather the truth, however unsettling it might become. The cracks in the portrait of happiness were almost invisible. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But for Amelia, a slow, silent storm had begun to gather. One marked not by thunder or lightning, but by the faintest shifts in light and shadow. The raw truth. The day the truth arrived, it landed softly. No dramatic phone call, no scandalous scene, just a quiet unraveling that began with a stray, unanswered text on Daniel's phone. It was late evening. The house had already settled into the familiar hush that came after Lucas's bedtime story. Amelia noticed Daniel's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter, its locked screen alight for just a heartbeat before fading away. She recognized the name. Claire, the business partner Daniel had mentioned in passing, always with clinical detachment. At first, she dismissed it as work, but a persistent tug of intuition, worn thin by weeks of half-answers and awkward silences, urged her forward. Alone in the kitchen, Amelia hesitated, her sense of propriety at war with the need to know. The phone wasn't password protected tonight. Her trembling hand reached for it. The message was short. Casual. Thank you for last night. Still thinking about you. C. It took Amelia a full minute to register what she was reading. As she scrolled upward, a string of messages bloomed into a portrait she never wanted to see. Late-night affections, private jokes, promises of secret meetings. The world inside that phone was startlingly intimate and painfully real. There it was, The confirmation of Daniel's infidelity, not whispered by rumors or pieced together from receipts, but confessed silently in digital traces she should never have found. The shock was physical first, a hollowing of her chest, a static buzzing in her ears. She read and reread the messages to be sure. Minutes dragged by as she stood rooted to the tiled floor, every line of text erasing the assumptions she'd clung to for so long. A torrent of emotions surged: disbelief, humiliation, and a deep, shattering sense of betrayal. The home she'd carefully curated, every laughter-filled dinner, and every warm, picture-perfect smile, suddenly felt like a lie exposed. She tried to reconcile this new, ugly truth with the tender, everyday moments she remembered. The way Daniel's hand had rested lightly at the small of her back, his affectionate calls to Lucas, the shared glances across crowded rooms. Had it all been a performance? Or had she simply missed the signs all along? Amelia sank into a kitchen chair, her mind a whirl. Should she confront Daniel now, wake Lucas and leave, or scream her pain into the night? Her breathing came shallow, but her composure stayed intact. Against the chaos in her heart, she found a strange, icy kernel of calm. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back, refusing to vent her heartbreak where no one could witness. She realized, with growing certainty, that an outburst would solve nothing. Instead, a new instinct took hold: silence. If Daniel was building his secret life so cunningly, Amelia would build her own wall of secrecy. One formed not from lies, but from quiet, deliberate observation. She needed time. She needed answers. The urge to scream and demand explanations dissolved, replaced by cold logic. This betrayal was not a storm to be unleashed, but a wound she must protect and study. For Lucas, for herself, she would not allow their lives to spiral into public chaos. That night, long after Daniel had gone to bed, Amelia sat alone in the darkness, tracing plans only she could see. Each breath steadied her, each tear wiped away with resolve. She replayed the last months, his late meetings, the perfume that didn't belong to her, the emotional distance. All the pieces fit now, painting a picture that was finally, painfully clear. Her trust was broken, but her will was not. She would not grant Daniel the satisfaction of confrontation, at least not yet. Instead, Amelia decided to move forward with her eyes open, her heart guarded, and every ounce of dignity she could muster. She resolved in that silent kitchen to prepare for the next steps quietly, methodically. If Daniel's double life was going to shatter their world, she would make sure she was the one holding the shards, not swept away by them. And as dawn painted the first hopeful blush on the horizon, Amelia found herself ready. Ready to face each lie with clarity. Ready to transform her heartbreak into strength. Ready, above all, to shield her son and herself from the wreckage ahead, whatever form it might take. Gathering evidence. In the days that followed her devastating discovery, Amelia felt the world shift beneath her feet. The ground no longer seemed solid, every familiar routine warped by an undercurrent of doubt. Gone was the spontaneous warmth that once filled her home. In its place was a calculated caution, a silent dance of observation and restraint. Amelia understood that she was living with a man she no longer truly knew, and yet she could not afford to let Daniel realize he was being watched. Determination crystallized in her mind. She would not confront him until she was ready. She would not be dismissed with half-truths or gaslighted into doubt. Quietly, methodically, Amelia began to build her own case, transforming herself from a dutiful wife into an invisible investigator within her own home. The first steps. Her initial steps were almost hesitant, as if she were trespassing in her own life. The morning after her discovery, she forced herself through routine, pouring cereal for Lucas, folding Daniel's shirts, watering the hydrangeas by the porch. But all the while, her thoughts ran miles ahead, analyzing every word, every glance, every gap in her husband's stories. She recalled every recent oddity, the passcode on his phone, the unexplained business dinners, the unfamiliar cologne. Now, instead of dismissing these as quirks of a demanding job, she cataloged them. Amelia started a private notebook, camouflaged among family recipe binders, where she recorded dates, times, and specific incidents. Each entry was concise. 6:18. Daniel out past midnight. Smelled of strong floral perfume. No explanation. 6:19. Glanced at phone repeatedly during dinner. Guarded when I sat beside him. Technology becomes her ally. Amelia's next move was to quietly harness technology. Despite holding herself to strict ethical standards her whole life, she knew she was justified now. Daniel's betrayal had rewritten the rules of her marriage. When he showered in the evenings or left his phone charging in the kitchen, she would seize the opportunity to look for hints. She searched his email for receipts of expensive gifts or reservations, the kind that would be odd for a business dinner. To her quiet satisfaction, she found digital crumbs, Uber receipts with unfamiliar destinations, a recurring charge for a flower delivery service, several Gmail confirmations for upscale restaurants she'd never visited with him. She took unobtrusive photographs of each piece of evidence with her own hidden phone, ensuring she did not alter or move anything that Daniel might notice. Her hands trembled, not from fear of discovery, but from the cold resolve that had taken hold of her. For every damning detail, she stored an image, a screenshot of a flowery text from C, a photo of a receipt tucked into Daniel's blazer, a canister of perfume in the glove compartment, a fragrance that did not belong to her. Audio and observation. As weeks passed, Amelia's vigilance intensified. She was no longer simply waiting for Daniel to slip up. She was creating her own opportunities to learn the truth. She began to pay close attention to his conversations, memorizing phone numbers he dialed, subtle changes in his mood before and after certain calls. When he spoke in low tones in the backyard or stepped into the garage for a hushed conversation, she lingered in the laundry room nearby, straining to hear fragments of talk. Some nights, she left her smartphone recorder running on the dining table during his late-night calls, hoping to capture enough context to confirm her suspicions. She learned to time her questions with strategic precision, gently probing for details about his whereabouts. "How was the meeting with Claire?" she'd ask, her tone deceptively casual, eyes focused on folding Lucas's t-shirt. Often, Daniel's eyes flickered, a brief flash of discomfort quickly concealed by a smile. More and more, his answers grew generic, the stories thinner, spoken with the impatience of someone who knows their mask is slipping. Physical evidence. Amelia's search extended beyond the digital sphere. Methodically, she checked Daniel's car, under the pretense of tidying up or searching for Lucas's lost soccer ball. She found shredded gum wrappers, crumbs from pastries, and napkins stamped with upscale cafe logos. Once, hidden beneath the passenger seat, she found an earring, simple, gold, and unmistakably not hers. She snapped a quick photo before sliding it back in place. At home, she gathered pieces of his increasingly careless behavior. Lipstick stains on a shirt collar, the faintest outline of a lipstick tube imprint in his briefcase. Even a delicate bracelet, broken and swiftly forgotten, found its way into her secret collection of evidence, carefully bagged in a spare Ziploc. The clinic of cold precision. Throughout these weeks, Amelia was a study in discipline. She concealed every shred of emotion, greeting Daniel with a practiced smile, participating in conversations as if nothing had changed. With Lucas, she was gentle and patient, determined to protect his innocence as long as possible. Underneath, though, her spine was steel. Each day, she reviewed her growing catalog of evidence, updating her secret folder on a password-protected cloud account. She never left anything to chance. All passwords were unique. All evidence was duplicated on a hidden USB drive stashed inside a hollowed-out sewing kit. She set up encrypted emails and spoke with a discreet family lawyer through a burner phone, careful never to use the family Wi-Fi. The emotional toll. Yet the burden was heavy. Night after night, she lay awake, listening to Daniel's soft breathing and the hum of the ceiling fan, thoughts swirling. Every new discovery brought both vindication and agony, proof of betrayal, but also of the life she would soon have to leave behind. There were moments when her heart ached, not just from Daniel's deception, but from her own duplicity. She hated the secrecy, even as it became her armor. Sometimes, when Lucas was asleep and Daniel was out working late, she allowed herself to grieve. In the quiet of her room, the mask slipped, and she wept for the years she could never have back. But always, she steeled herself again in the morning, reminding herself what was at stake: her dignity, her son's well-being, and the right to rewrite the narrative of her own life. Planning the escape. With her catalog of evidence growing, Amelia began thinking beyond documentation. She started to plan, discreetly, how she and Lucas would leave when the time came. But she knew, with the thoroughness that had characterized every step of this process, that the cornerstone of her freedom would be the evidence she had gathered. It was her insurance, her shield, and her statement of truth in a world that so often doubted women's word against a powerful, well-liked man. Resolve of the wronged. By the end of July, Amelia's secret case was near completion. She had digital files, photographs, audio recordings, and physical artifacts, each one meticulously time-stamped, organized, and backed up. The walls of her sanctuary had grown thick, impenetrable. Yet from within, Amelia saw not just loss, but the shimmering possibility of freedom. She was no longer the naive wife who looked the other way. She was a woman armed with knowledge and courage, ready not just to leave a broken marriage, but to expose the rot at its core. And as the summer sun blazed over the still, deceptive quiet of her suburban street, Amelia was finished being a ghost in her own life. She was ready, almost, for the next silent, powerful move. Forming alliances. With her secret ledger of evidence nearly complete, Amelia's solitude began to weigh heavily. The burden of knowledge and constant vigilance pressed against her chest, often leaving her breathless. She understood the stakes. If she miscalculated, she could lose everything, including her son. Navigating each day with measured composure became both a shield and a prison. Alone in her bed at night, Amelia realized that strength did not always require isolation. She needed help, discreet but unwavering, to escape the labyrinth she had found herself in. Choosing her confidant's trust, once given so freely and for so long, had become precious and hazardous. Amelia drew up a mental list of possible allies, weighing past loyalty, discretion, and understanding. She needed support, but any hint of her intentions spreading to Daniel or into neighborhood gossip would destroy her advantage. Her choice fell, first, on her older sister, Caroline. Once inseparable, they had drifted apart when Amelia married and dedicated herself to family life. Still, if anyone could keep a secret, it was Carolyn, who had weathered her own share of heartbreak and understood the necessity of quiet resilience. Amelia called her from a park, her voice trembling despite her resolve. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate. There was no outpouring of rage, no melodrama, only facts, Daniel's absences, the evidence she had gathered, and her fears for herself and Lucas. Caroline's response was instant and unwavering. Shock and anger rippled through her words, but she quickly moved to reassurance, promising silence and steadfast support. Her first advice was clear and practical. Protect your assets, document everything, and do not let Daniel sense you know. From that moment on, Amelia felt a sliver of relief, the first crack of light in her darkened world. Seeking professional counsel. Next came the legal labyrinth. Amelia knew she needed expert guidance not only to safeguard her rights and her son's well-being, but to avoid missteps that could sabotage her case. The thought of Googling divorce attorney from her kitchen table made her cringe with anxiety. Daniel occasionally checked the web browser or family credit card statements. Instead, Caroline provided the contact details and the funds for a discreet family law specialist, renowned for protecting women blindsided by infidelity. Their first meeting took place at a quiet cafe, far from their neighborhood. The attorney, Ms. Walsh, listened intently as Amelia shared her story, unveiling her archive of digital and physical evidence. Walsh's questions were pointed, but her manner was empathetic. She mapped out a step-by-step strategy. Begin separating finances, secure important documents, open a private bank account in her maiden name, and prepare for the possibility of custody negotiations. Walsh emphasized, above all, the importance of secrecy. One careless move could mean losing legal leverage or putting herself and Lucas at risk. Armed with guidance and a growing list of tasks, Amelia began to feel purpose returning. She was no longer helpless, but a woman drawing the boundaries of her own freedom. Finding friendship in unlikely places. Amelia also realized she'd need allies beyond blood and the law. Simple, practical help for the day-to-day logistics of a possible escape. Her next choice was subtle. Mrs. Evans, her neighbor across the street. A widow in her 60s, Mrs. Evans was both sharp-eyed and tactful, never one for idle gossip. Over shared mugs of tea, Amelia gradually steered conversations toward broader subjects. Parenting struggles, the demands of being a stay-at-home mom, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied domestic life. Finally, one afternoon when Lucas was at school and the neighborhood was quiet, Amelia confided in her, not in detail, but enough to explain that she was going through difficult times and might need a favor in the near future. Mrs. Evans offered warmth and understanding, hardly pressing for details. She agreed to let Amelia use her address for private mail, store a spare set of bags for Lucas and herself, and, if the moment ever came, provide temporary refuge until Amelia could reach safety. The sense of having a safe house within shouting distance gave Amelia quiet comfort. Even the strongest strategy, she realized, could falter without a place to run. Strengthening emotional defenses. As she solidified her support network, Amelia confronted another truth. She would need mental and emotional fortitude to see the plan through. She began meeting, under the pretense of running errands, with a therapist recommended by Ms. Walsh. For years, Amelia had poured all of herself into her family, letting her sense of self gently fade in the background. Unpacking her pain and confusion in a professional setting, even for just an hour, gave her new language to describe her struggle. Not as failure or weakness, but as survival and rebirth. Therapy helped her process the guilt over snooping and deception, the anger smothered beneath layers of composure, and especially the worry of how the truth would eventually impact Lucas. She built strategies to support her son, to explain the coming changes in language he could understand without poisoning his love for his father. The therapist reinforced Amelia's sense of agency, helping her stitch together an identity not bound by Daniel's betrayal, but strengthened by it. Guarding financial independence. The next alliance was with herself. In the quietest hours, Amelia took steps to regain her financial autonomy. She inventoried joint assets, gathered tax returns, photographed valuables, and quietly funneled spare cash into her newly opened personal account. She scheduled appointments with a job coach, researching part-time work in architecture and design, even signing up for online courses under the guise of self-improvement. Each secret step was a brick in her foundation, a way to ensure that when the time came, she and Lucas would not be left scrambling. A circle of trust and caution. Amelia's circle of trust remained small. She resisted the urge to overshare with friends at school, pickup, or the mothers' group at church. Paranoia became her companion. Every misplaced receipt, curious glance, or unexpected question felt like a potential leak in her boat. She double-checked her phone for tracking apps, swept her emails for suspicious logins, and even left decoy documents out for Daniel to find, just to see if he would bite. Paranoia, she learned, could be sharpened into a tool. Every alliance, every small victory strengthened her resolve. But she never lost sight of Lucas, the reason she fought so hard for a quiet exit and a dignified future. She listened more closely to his needs, tucked him in at night with words of love and security she herself was beginning to reclaim. As the August sun scorched the lawns of their suburban neighborhood, Amelia finally sensed the possibility of release, not alone, but with a clandestine army who believed in her story, her worth, and her right to start over. Each secret whispered, each number saved in her hidden phone, each compassionate nod in a therapist's chair, built the scaffolding of her future. Amelia was no longer just a wronged wife. She became the quiet architect of her family's new beginning. And as Daniel continued his charade, blind to the network forming at the edges of his vision, Amelia drew her circle closer, preparing for the day her alliances would become her freedom. Plotting an escape route. With her network of alliances in place and a folder of evidence locked away, Amelia finally confronted the reality that had haunted her for weeks. The time for passive survival was over. Beneath her outward patience and composure, she was furiously at work architecting not just an exit, but a future. To escape Daniel's ever-watchful presence without risking Lucas's security or her own dignity, she realized she needed a plan precise as surgery, and just as delicate. Blueprints for freedom. Every morning before dawn, while the house was swaddled in pre-sunrise hush, Amelia would steal silent moments for herself. She would settle at the small vanity table in her bedroom, her notebook open, her laptop screen casting a faint blue glow. There, she drafted her most secret blueprint yet, the step-by-step disassembly of an entire life. The document grew each day. It began with the basics: packed bags discreetly stashed at Mrs. Evans' house and in the trunk of her own car, cash set aside from every grocery run, printouts of critical documents slipped into a folder beneath Lucas's coloring books. She scanned birth certificates, insurance policies, and emotional heirlooms, preserving what could not be physically carried. Nothing was left to chance. She listed contact numbers for Caroline and Ms. Walsh on slips of paper hidden in jeans pockets and coat linings, memorizing them in case she was ever separated from her phone. If the day came suddenly, everything she needed to start anew could be gathered in minutes. The exit's logistics. Amelia mapped her movements, choreographing each potential leaving day down to the hour. There would be no signs of panic, no shouted confrontations or hurried packing scenes. Instead, she would leave as she had lived much of her marriage, quietly, intelligently, unseen. Each day, she rehearsed the mundane triggers that would provide her the perfect pretext: A doctor's appointment with Lucas, an emergency call from Caroline, an errand to the post office. The moment Daniel's guard was down, they would vanish. Lucas's safety was the axis on which every decision spun. Amelia coordinated discreetly with his school counselor, expressing vague concerns about possible changes at home in case she needed to arrange a last-minute pickup outside normal hours. She memorized the best routes from home to both Caroline's house and Mrs. Evans in case she was being watched, or worse, followed. She physically rehearsed slipping out with Lucas, rehearsing the smallest details: snacks in his backpack, favorite stuffed toy, a jacket by the door, emotional turmoil, and the battle within. But plotting escape came with a cost. Each night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, sometimes beside her, sometimes on the couch with half-empty whiskey glass in hand, Amelia would lie awake, heart pounding with a cocktail of grief, guilt, and adrenaline. Her mind replayed the good years, the first honeymoon trip to San Antonio, Lucas's birth, the day they bought the house together. Grief haunted her, not only for the marriage's end, but for the death of the woman she'd been all those years ago, blissfully unaware of the fault line beneath her home. What if she forgave? Couldn't it all be easier if she just closed her eyes and waited for Daniel's love to return? At her lowest, in the marrow-deep solitude of the night, forgiveness appeared almost tempting, a sedative to keep the pain at bay and preserve the illusion of family. But every memory of Daniel's betrayal, every cold lie, every moment she saw Lucas waiting by the window for a father who might never return home, stoked her resolve anew. Even the silence between husband and wife, once comforting, now seemed to ring with accusation. Amelia instead let her thoughts return to Lucas's innocent laughter, her hopes for him, and her own quietly rekindled sense of self. She began to realize there are wounds that no amount of forgiveness can heal. Because some betrayals, unspoken and repeated, seek not amends, but erasure. Maternal instincts and newfound self-worth. Lucas had become Amelia's compass. Everything was done with his heart in mind. She created storybooks about big changes and safe adventures, gentle parables sown with reassurance. She ran secret checklists of his favorite foods, teachers' phone numbers, and the bedtime routine he treasured, determined to keep his world as stable as possible no matter how hers shook. At the same time, a new undercurrent of self-worth ran through her days, a sensation almost forgotten after years of bending to someone else's happiness. She realized that in making her escape, she was not just running from Daniel, but fiercely choosing herself and her son. Each step in the plan, each dollar saved, each minute gained, felt like a stitch repairing the fabric of her own identity. Testing the pathways, preparing for traps. Amelia knew her competence was her greatest shield, but her paranoia was now a friend, not a foe. On quiet afternoons, she would test Daniel's attention by feigning carelessness, leaving a random folder near his office, pretending to misplace her phone in a spot he frequented. If he seemed suspicious, she'd back off the plan for days. If not, she'd proceed with new confidence. She experienced the bizarre duality of fearing and outwitting a man who, to the outside world, was still her loving husband. She secured decoy flash drives and email accounts, making sure that even if Daniel snooped, he would only find innocuous family photos and stale grocery lists. She scheduled fake calls with Mrs. Evans to practice cover stories. The clandestine ballet became almost routine, planning for the worst, hoping for the best. Every morning, while Lucas finished breakfast, Amelia scanned the calendar, marking both safe days and warning signals. She set up coded texts with Caroline for emergencies. They rehearsed scenarios in low voices while pretending to chat about school field trips and family recipes. Still, she refused to let fear dictate every moment. She built beauty into her days, taking Lucas to the park, letting herself savor small victories, the taste of her favorite coffee, the feeling of fresh air on her face, the first smile she'd shared with a stranger in months. A final, silent resolve. Toward the end of August, the outlines of her plan became as clear as blueprints. Every detail accounted for, every ally informed, every route rehearsed. What remained was the waiting, the test of nerves, the acceptance of risk, and the willingness, finally, to leap. Alone one last evening, Amelia stood in the quiet kitchen, hand resting on the counter. She allowed herself a single moment of stillness, feet planted on the tile where she had once discovered Daniel's betrayal. The memories tried to crowd in: wedding vows, old laughter, Lucas's birth cries. But this time, Amelia let them pass like ghosts. She wasn't abandoning a life. She was choosing the rest of her life. She was choosing safety, integrity, and the chance to live free from doubt. For Lucas, for herself. For the future neither of them had truly known before now. By the time the sun rose, another careful step drew her closer to freedom. And when the day of escape finally dawned, it would not be marked by fear or uncertainty, but by the quiet, triumphant courage of a woman who had plotted her own deliverance. The fateful night. The day began with an unnatural stillness, the Texas heat pressing against the windows like an omen. For Amelia, the hours seemed suspended, every tick of the clock straining with expectation. She moved through her routines with a composure so complete that even Lucas, usually quick to notice a crack in his mother's voice or an unsteady hand, remained blissfully oblivious. To Daniel, this was just another Friday, albeit one bookended, as usual, by excuses and distractions. But every gesture Amelia made that day was calculated. She packed Lucas's favorite pajamas and his worn teddy bear into a tote bag, laying them beneath layers of folded clothes, coloring books, family photos. She double-checked the folder of documents, birth certificates, health insurance cards, her secret bank account information, the USB drive meticulously labeled recipes, but holding her entire arsenal of evidence. Each item was quietly accounted for, each memory that mattered tucked gently away. As dusk approached, Amelia took Lucas out for ice cream, an indulgent treat rarely enjoyed on a weeknight. She savored the sweetness in his laughter, the way he licked chocolate sauce from his chin, the easy trust in his eyes. They strolled through the quiet neighborhood, Lucas pointing out imaginary shapes in the clouds. Their conversation was light, but a silent goodbye thrummed in every word Amelia spoke. She wondered, fleetingly, whether she would miss the way the twilight settled over their block, or the cracked blue of their porch swing. Returning home, she set about preparing Daniel's favorite dinner, a final act of normalcy. Her hands were steady as she chopped vegetables, but her thoughts skittered, going over her list for the 100th time. Daniel arrived home late, already distracted, his lips brushing Lucas's forehead half-heartedly before disappearing into his home office. After dinner, as Lucas read comic books on the living room rug, Amelia slipped away to her room. She removed a letter from the top drawer, the letter she had drafted in the early whispers of dawn, rewriting it until the words felt both ice-cold and irrevocable. She slid it into an envelope, along with a slim stack of printed photographs and page after page of damning screenshots. She placed the envelope on Daniel's desk, where he could not miss it. The note inside was precise, neither vengeful nor pleading. Daniel, by the time you read this, Lucas and I will be gone. I know everything. All the late nights, the excuses, the secrets with Claire, the lies you so carefully constructed. None of it escaped me. I have gathered proof, but I'm not seeking revenge, only truth and freedom. I kept our home intact for far longer than you deserved, for Lucas's sake and out of love for what we once had. Now, I am choosing dignity and safety for myself and our son. Do not contact us unless it is through my attorney. I hope, for your sake and our son's, you find the integrity you lost. Closing the bedroom door, she knelt beside Lucas. Honey, we're going to see Aunt Caroline tonight, just for a little adventure. Would you like that? Lucas beamed, eager for an unexpected sleepover and the promise of his cousin's stories. She had already prepared her cover. Lucas's overnight bag was for the fun, and the plan, at least for her son, was nothing more than a spontaneous family visit. Amelia waited until she heard Daniel's shower turn on, then gathered their things with practiced efficiency. The car keys sat ready by the door. The tote bag, zipped and plain, could have belonged to any suburban mom on her way to soccer practice. As the sun finally bled out and the night settled in, she guided Lucas to the car. She hesitated only once, glancing at the house where her adult life had unfolded, the dining table where birthdays were celebrated, the hallway lined with childhood drawings, the kitchen echoing with the ghosts of kitchen conversations. In that pause, Amelia allowed herself to mourn. Not loudly, not with tears. There would be time for breaking down later, but with a long, deep breath that let pain and love coexist, at least for a moment. Then she buckled Lucas in, started the engine, and drove into the anonymity of the night. Each mile put distance between them and Daniel's world, a world that had turned brittle and false. Mrs. Evans's porch light glowed as a silent signal, and Amelia left a backup envelope with her, just as they'd planned. Then it was on to Caroline's, Lucas drifting to sleep against his car window, unaware of the transformation underfoot. Back at the house, Daniel stepped out of his shower to an uncanny quiet. He expected to find Amelia humming in the kitchen or Lucas's laughter trailing from the den, but the rooms all felt oddly abandoned. On his desk, the envelope waited. He opened it, hands unsteady, eyes scanning its contents with growing disbelief and dread. The neat stack of evidence, Amelia's unemotional but searing words. By the time he'd grasped the reality, the panic inside him had begun to bloom. He called her, first calmly, then frantically. The call went to voicemail. He tried Caroline, then Mrs. Evans, then mutual friends, each attempt more desperate than the last. For all his calculated deceit, Daniel was left scrambling, powerless before the thoroughness of Amelia's exit. Meanwhile, at Caroline's house, Amelia tucked Lucas into bed, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. He yawned, sleepily asking if she'd read him a story. She nodded, reading softly from his favorite picture book, the rhythm of the familiar words anchoring them both. When Lucas's breathing deepened and his grip on Teddy loosened, Amelia slipped outside onto the back porch. There, beneath a sky unburdened by suburban lamplight, she allowed herself to unravel. Silent sobs shook her shoulders, not just from grief, but from the fierce, wild relief that came with survival. She called Ms. Walsh, her attorney, confirming they were safe and asking for next steps. Her hands weren't trembling anymore. The night's silence was now threaded not with secrets and lies, but with a fragile sense of hope. No police lights, no dramatic confrontation. Just the gentle, indomitable resolve of a woman who had reclaimed her life, not through scandal, but through careful courage. Before dawn, Daniel sent a final text. "I'm sorry. Please, come home. We can work this out. Think of Lucas." Amelia deleted the message, her heart aching even as she felt a subtle, indestructible peace. She might not know what lay ahead, but she had chosen this path for herself and for her son. As the first blue hint of morning touched the horizon, Amelia sat in the quiet, ready for whatever the day demanded. The fateful night was not just an end. It was the beginning of everything she and Lucas truly deserved. The fall of the perfect man News of Amelia's abrupt departure spread through the neighborhood like a summer wildfire. At first, there were only murmurs, questions raised by Lucas's sudden absence, curious glances exchanged on driveways, a sense that the house on the corner with its white picket fence was quieter, somehow emptier than it should have been. But by Sunday, the rumors had ignited into open speculation. Daniel Preston's dazzling world, once the envy and heartbeat of the community, had begun to implode. For years, Daniel had carefully curated his image. He was the consummate family man, always the first to volunteer for school fundraisers, the neighbor who hosted backyard barbecues, the husband who never missed a family portrait. His real estate firm's success, bolstered by glowing testimonials and a beaming wife at his side, had been undeniable. Locals admired, some even idolized, the seamless perfection of his life. But that illusion, Amelia now knew, was built on sand. The release of the truth. Amelia, guided by her lawyer and her own unbendable resolve, made her move quietly but decisively. Her packet, meticulously organized, chronological, cross-referenced, was not simply dropped on Daniel's desk, but released strategically. Through Ms. Walsh, it was forwarded to key figures: the head of Daniel's firm, a community board leader, the school principal who had asked once too often about Amelia's well-being, and eventually the women's association that had cheered the Prestons as the ideal family. There was nothing vindictive in Amelia's act, simply an unvarnished record, months of receipts, text threads, hotel confirmations, and most damningly, a written statement outlining the toxic reality she and Lucas had endured behind closed doors. Almost overnight, the man everyone thought they knew bore a different face. The crumbling professional empire. The fallout at Daniel's workplace was swift and ferocious. By early Monday morning, his phone began vibrating nonstop. First came his business partner, tone clipped, inquiring about personal issues affecting the reputation of the firm. Within hours, clients called to question the rumors swirling on social media. Half whispers about affairs, screenshots leaked by concerned parties. The board convened an emergency meeting to address the emerging scandal. What Daniel had always underestimated was how tightly wound professional trust and personal reputation could be in a world of country clubs and handshake deals. The affair itself was a wound, but the pattern of deception, abuse of company time, and misuse of client funds for romantic escapades cut deeper. His business partner, seeking to salvage what remained of their brand, pushed Daniel out, citing irreconcilable breaches of ethics. Within a week, Daniel's name was no longer featured on the website or the office door. The lucrative deals he had once orchestrated evaporated, clients withdrawing contracts rather than risk association with his name. It was as if the world had been waiting for a crack in his armor, and with a single blow, the dominoes all toppled. The community's verdict, Daniel's social downfall, was more excruciating. The neighborhood's subtle hierarchies, carefully built through years of Christmas parties and PTA meetings, became icy battlegrounds. Friends who once gathered around his fire pit stopped returning calls. Cars slowed as they passed his house, familiar faces now tight with disapproval, or worse, pity. Mrs. Evans, always watchful, spread quiet words of support for Amelia and Lucas, making it clear that the boy would always have a place in her home. School invitations for Lucas shifted overnight. Birthday party invites dried up. Daniel, once a fixture on the soccer sidelines, found himself alone in the stands, parents whispering at his back. Even the pastor at their church, a man who had blessed Lucas's christening, offered only a terse nod when Daniel appeared one Sunday, unaccompanied and disheveled. Social media, once clogged with sunlit photos of the Preston family, turned vicious. The perfect couple narrative dissolved under the weight of screenshots and receipts. Friends unfriended Daniel. Business associates quietly blocked his number. The isolation was relentless, The silence of his phone, a constant rebuke. Loved ones turn away. Inside his shrinking world, Daniel wore his shame like a second skin. He reached out to friends and family. Some responded with clipped politeness. Others simply cut contact. Even Claire, his former romantic escape, faded into the background, her calls turning from passionate to irate. She wanted no part of his public collapse. His parents, stunned and mortified, urged discretion. Siblings, once proud of his achievements, began to distance themselves, worried their own reputations might suffer through proximity. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself entirely and undeniably alone. A home turned cold. The house itself became a monument to memory and regret. In every room, an absence echoed. Lucas's laughter at the breakfast table, Amelia's soft humming in the kitchen, the smell of baking bread. Daniel wandered from room to room late at night, haunted by the evidence Amelia had left behind. The framed wedding photos, the meticulously tended garden, even the empty chair across from his at dinner. All were small gravestones of the life he once took for granted. The silence pressed against him, a weight heavier than any accusation. The rooms were neat but devoid of warmth, the refrigerator full but flavorless. Sometimes he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Facing himself, in his moments of forced solitude, reality set in. Not just the consequences, but Daniel's own accountability. He read Amelia's words, not just in her letter, but in the careful, unemotional documentation she left behind. There was no bluster, no melodrama, only precision and quiet conviction. He could not escape the truth. The wreckage was of his own making. The mask of perfection he had so carefully constructed had been torn away, revealing only emptiness beneath. He tried to call Amelia again, leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to remorseful to angry. But each rang into silence. Lucas's absence ached most acutely during the mundane moments, missing shoes by the door, giggles over cereal, the lullabies Daniel half remembered from happier times. He recognized now how little he had truly known about the fortress Amelia had quietly built, protecting herself and their son, while he shuffled lies beneath his smile. New reality. The passage of every day forced Daniel to reckon with his new reality. The headlines faded, but the consequences did not. There were no apologies left that could restore his job, no clever explanations for his lost social standing. The man who had once seemed to hold the entire world in his hands now clung to a semblance of normalcy. Routine visits to the grocery store, empty conversations with the few who tolerated his presence, long nights haunted by regret. For Amelia and Lucas, freedom was the reward for endurance. For Daniel, the punishment was himself, an empty house, a silent phone, and the knowledge that the loss was permanent. The perfect man had fallen, not by some spectacular misfortune, but by the slow, relentless force of unmasked truth. The journey of transformation. The first morning after their escape, Amelia awoke to unfamiliar sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains in Caroline's guest room. For a moment, the gentle quiet seemed almost like a dream, a soft hand of freedom she was scared to grasp too tightly. Lucas slept on a fold-out bed nearby, his arms wrapped around Teddy, his breathing steady and peaceful. For months, Amelia's waking moments had started with dread. Now, there was just silence and the possibility of something new. Starting over. The early days in Caroline's home were a mix of relief and disorientation. Amelia rolled up her sleeves and helped with chores, grateful for simple tasks that occupied her hands and head. She kept her world small, unpacking bags, preparing breakfast, walking Lucas to the little park at the end of the cul-de-sac. When they signed temporary school paperwork for Lucas, Amelia's hand shook. Was she really someone who could start over, just like that? But the teacher smiled kindly, and Lucas took to the new playground quickly, making friends over football cards and recess games. At night, Amelia found herself sorting through crossroads. Caroline offered a listening ear and gentle reminders. One day at a time, Am. Just one at a time. Sometimes they laughed at old memories. Sometimes Caroline simply poured them both chamomile tea and let the silence stand for what words could not reach. Navigating uncertainty. Beneath the calm surface, uncertainty seethed. There was paperwork, court dates, custody filings, phone calls with Ms. Walsh. There was the hunt for a new job, complicated by Amelia's years away from architecture. She updated her resume in the quiet hours and sent out applications under her maiden name, both terrified and exhilarated when the first interview requests trickled in. Each reply was a small thread she could cling to, evidence that the world wanted more from her than sacrifices for someone else's dream. She had hard conversations with Lucas, explaining as gently as possible why their old life was over. Sometimes, she said, wrapping him in a hug, grown-ups have to make hard choices to keep everyone safe and happy. Your dad loves you, but we need a quieter, happier place to call home for a little while. Lucas nodded, eyes big and wise. He drew her pictures, one of a house with 3 windows, a sun, and stick figures holding hands. That's us now, Mom, he explained. She pinned it above her borrowed dresser, a new banner for her private war. Discovering strength. The hard days were inevitable. There were mornings when Amelia stared at herself in the mirror, questioning her worth, weighed down by guilt and loss. The routines she clung to, packing lunches, combing out Lucas's hair, making her bed, became small ceremonies of control. But as September unraveled into October, she noticed flickers of change. She stopped flinching when her phone rang. She started saying I instead of we on paperwork and in conversation. There was a new set to her shoulders, a spine of quiet confidence built by necessity. Therapy deepened her resolve. In the safety of Ms. Tran's office, she allowed herself to rage and grieve, to sift through the layers of expectation and doubt that had shaped her marriage. She learned that anger was not something to hide from Lucas, but something to manage and release. She found words for her trauma, her hope, her regrets. Slowly, imperceptibly, she reclaimed the contours of her own identity. She was not just a caretaker or a cast-off. She was a woman with ambitions, forging independence. With support from Caroline and her legal team, Amelia set up her own bank account, checked her credit score, and negotiated a child support agreement with Daniel's lawyer. She found part-time work drafting designs for a local builder, and when schedules allowed, moonlighted with freelance design gigs online. The money was modest, but it was hers, earned on her own terms. Lucas served as both anchor and purpose. She cheered at his little league games and set up weekly Zoom calls with his counselor to help him process their new reality. Some nights he cried for his old life, and Amelia held him close, rocking away the ache with promises of love and stories that always ended. And they found happiness, not because everything was easy, but because they had each other. Through all of it, Amelia cultivated new friendships, other single mothers she met at school functions, neighbors with ordinary struggles, older women from Caroline's book club. Their voices formed a kind of shelter, proof that she was neither foolish nor alone. With time, Amelia found herself returning a stranger's wave and laughing at a joke that was truly funny, not just polite. Transforming pain into purpose. As autumn deepened, Amelia began to see her story reflected in the countless other women who had left broken marriages. She started volunteering, in small ways at first, mentoring young women at a career center, helping with after-school programs. Their gratitude brought warmth that was more real than the hollow compliments she'd once received at Daniel's side. Through their shared struggles, she discovered that survival could be radical, even celebratory. One crisp Saturday afternoon, she took Lucas to the art museum. As they wandered the galleries, he pointed out colors he loved, tugging at her sleeve, eyes wide. Amelia realized she hadn't been in a museum since college. Standing before a striking abstract canvas, she let herself feel awe, not just for the art, but for her own capacity to feel so much again. The silent victory. Daniel called only when required by the courts or school, his attempts at apology awkward and infrequent. Amelia responded with calm professionalism, uninterested in reopening wounds. As she watched her ex-husband's facade dissolve with each passing event, Amelia felt no urge for revenge. Her victory was quieter. A life lived on her own terms, each day stitched with honesty and hard-won self-respect. No social media post or neighborhood gossip could undo the authenticity she was building for herself and her son. Her pain didn't dissipate all at once. Some nights still brought memories that ached like bruises, but those bruises, she realized, were proof of survival, a path marked by courage, faith, and the relentless refusal to let pain define her. Becoming whole again. By the end of winter, Amelia had saved enough to rent a modest apartment in a nearby school district. She decorated it with thrift store finds and Lucas's art. The space glowed not only with lamps and laughter, but with possibility. An open door to whatever she might dream next. Sometimes, Lucas would curl up next to her on the worn couch and whisper, "We're okay now, Mom." And it felt true. Standing by her window on a winter evening, city lights glittering beyond the glass, Amelia exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. The journey of transformation wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about staring down its darkness and saying, softly, steadfastly, "I survived." And now, she was finally free to become whoever she wanted to be. Closing the past, embracing the future. Early spring sunlight slanted through the modest kitchen window of Amelia's new apartment, painting the walls with gold. Outside, the city hummed awake. A world of traffic, dog walkers, children darting to buses wearing jackets just a little too thin. Amelia stood at the counter, savoring the steam from a single cup of coffee. For the first time in recent memory, there was no urgency to the morning. There was only the ritual of quiet, the hum of the microwave, the patter of Lucas's socked feet, the familiar weightlessness of possibility. Mending the soul. The process of healing was never neat. Some days, pain would rise up like a wave, catching Amelia off guard with the memory of a laugh, the echo of Lucas's question, "Will Daddy come to my game today?" The past lingered in odd places. A song on the radio, the scent of fresh-cut grass, the birthday candles she still insisted on lighting for Lucas, even though the parties were smaller now. But with each passing week, the ache softened. Lucas, too, began to find his footing. His dreams no longer involved fleeing shadows, and he stopped flinching at the sound of raised voices on TV. The little boy who once watched the door with hope now ran to greet new friends in the apartment courtyard, his spirit unburdened. Amelia cherished their nightly routines, reading stories beneath a thrifted lamp, tucking Lucas's stuffed bear in beside him. She honored her son's questions with honesty, but never bitterness. "Grown-ups make their own mistakes," she told him gently. "We love you. That part doesn't break, no matter what happens." There were still tears, but they belonged to the past, not the promise of the future. Learning to forgive. True closure, Amelia discovered, was not about forgetting or excusing Daniel's betrayal. It was the choice, day by day, not to carry anger into tomorrow. Therapy continued, sometimes for Lucas, sometimes for herself, sometimes together. In the therapist's softly lit office, Amelia learned to set boundaries, to listen without self-judgment, to forgive herself for not seeing sooner what had unraveled beneath her roof. Forgiveness arrived in fragments, first for herself, then for Daniel. She no longer waited for apologies that never came, nor did she stalk his life online, hoping for evidence of regret. If their paths crossed, at school events or in brief handovers, she greeted him with civility, but no longer with dread. Daniel, for his part, remained diminished, regret flickering at the edges of his mannerisms, yet trapped by choices he alone could answer for. For Amelia, the past now existed as memory, no longer as prison. A model of resilience. Word spread quietly of Amelia's transformation. Other mothers at Lucas's school looked to her with admiration, some hesitant, some emboldened to ask for help themselves. She spoke once, nervously, at a gathering for women navigating separation, recounting her journey not as a tale of survival, but as one of self-reclamation. Her voice trembled as she spoke about the fear, the small victories, the nights that felt endless. But her message resonated. You are not broken because someone broke your trust. You are stronger because you mended your own heart. Her reputation, which once hinged on perfect lawns and family portraits, became something deeper in her new community. Neighbors trusted her with small kindnesses, watching over children after school, lending flour for a birthday cake, sharing a table at weekend farmers markets. In doing so, Amelia and Lucas wove themselves into the fabric of a new world, built not on illusion, but on authentic connection. Lucas's new chapter. Lucas's growth mirrored his mother's courage. He joined Little League, his laughter now easy and unguarded. With gentle help, he learned to name and manage his feelings, to write letters to his dad that he might never send. Amelia watched as her son built friendships, brought home art projects, and asked, what if questions about a world he no longer feared? On weekends, they'd bike through city parks, stop at food trucks for tacos beneath open skies, and take turns choosing new books at the library. Sometimes, Lucas would snuggle next to Amelia on the old couch and whisper, "We're safe now, Mom, right?" Each time, Amelia could answer with growing certainty, "Yes, sweetheart, we really are." Returning to passion. With Lucas in school and stability restored, Amelia unearthed pieces of herself she'd almost forgotten. She started sketching again late at night, her fingers tracing lines of potential across blank paper. Soon, side projects trickled in. A neighbor's kitchen redesign, a mural for the local youth center. Bit by bit, her portfolio grew, and so did her confidence. Amelia realized architecture was no longer just a career she'd left behind. It was a calling still alive within her. She joined online design forums, attended workshops, and built connections with local professionals. The act of creation, once buried beneath years of domestic routine, became a healing ritual. What she built now, she built for herself and for Lucas. Leaving the past without forgetting. Despite her progress, Amelia remained grateful for the lessons her old life had taught her. She kept a small box tucked in her closet. Lucas's baby bracelet, a faded photo of the three of them on the beach, and the letter she'd left for Daniel the night she walked away. These were not artifacts of regret, but reminders of a journey survived. A testament to pain faced, endured, and transcended. She knew the risk of new trust would always feel sharp, the ache of loss occasionally resurfacing. But she no longer let fear dictate the size of her dreams or the boundaries of her heart. An open-ended tomorrow. One cool afternoon, as cherry blossoms drifted through city streets, Amelia and Lucas sat on the apartment balcony, legs dangling over a world in bloom. Lucas traced shapes in the clouds, humming a tune he'd learned in music class. Amelia closed her eyes, letting the breeze carry away old anxieties. "Do you think we'll always live here?" Lucas asked. Amelia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I don't know, honey. Maybe we'll move again. Maybe we'll stay. But wherever we go, we'll make it ours. We get to choose. Together." Lucas grinned, leaning into her side. "I hope we always choose adventure." Amelia kissed his head, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. For the first time, hope felt permanent instead of fragile, a thread unbroken, weaving through days yet to come. A new legacy. As twilight pressed close, Amelia set aside fear and regret. She was not the sum of her losses, not defined by her heartbreak. She was the architect of her life, the steady force shaping a future bright with promise, for herself, for Lucas, and for anyone who needed proof that even the deepest wounds could become sources of strength. And so, as evening settled over the city and laughter drifted through the window, Amelia turned the page, leaving the past closed, her heart open and her eyes clear for the journey ahead.